The coronavirus pandemic has wreaked unprecedented havoc on children, families and communities around the world, of course. Now, one of the more worrying numbers coming out of the pandemic is nearly 1 million girls could be blocked from going back to school because they'd fallen pregnant during this time. A World Vision report, which we'll unpack for you now, warns that the sub-Saharan economy could suffer billions in GDP losses due to COVID-19. We're joined by Barbara Kalima-Piri from World Vision to look at just how devastating this is. Barbara, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for coming in this morning. So tell me about why some 1 million pregnant African girls could be blocked from returning to school. There's a lot more to it than simply them not going back, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And there are quite a number of reasons. When you look, for example, among the sub-Saharan governments, one of the things that has come out very strongly is what we're calling the exclusion policy. So you see, for example, in Ebola crisis in West Africa, we had quite a number of children that couldn't, about 11,000 of them couldn't get back into school because the policies in that country did not allow them to get back. So we have, for example, in Tanzania, more recently, the president, I think it's 2017, actually mentioned that any girl that falls pregnant cannot go back to school. You are done, which is basically a discriminatory policy. So the idea is that a lot of countries do not have these re-entry policies to allow girls to return back to school. So that's one of them. And then the other one is that when the government was trying to push to resolve the issue of the pandemic, a lot of schools were closed in almost about 194 countries, affecting about 1.6 billion learners. So a lot of them had a lot of time at home. And the report actually shows that there are quite a number that were involved in risky behavior. And incest was quite high as well, domestic violence and many others. So because of those restrictions, being stuck at home and not being able to go to school, the girls were exposed to those risky behaviors.
They weren't, and I found this part fascinating. It's just merely adding to what you're saying. The school closures during this crisis increasing the number of child protection risks. So apart from an education in many countries, and I'm sure it's the case also here in South Africa, girls are protected at school. They're not in school anymore. Not only is there the possibility of risky behavior, but it talks about early and forced marriage, sexual violence, and many other child protection risks that fall away. So it's not just because of promiscuous behavior. There's often a much darker side to what happens, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. But, I mean, we have to put a caveat as well that it's not that violence against children only happens in homes, and that, you know, even at school, we've been getting reports where children are also abused. And we've seen, particularly in the lockdown, and when some of the children have gone back to school, the lack of understanding of some of the teachers, lacking the gender transformative education know-how, where they have to understand that they don't need to discriminate against these children, has become very rampant. Even when teenage girls go to hospitals, they are mocked and bullied because they're young and, you know, they're teased. And just the whole stigma, particularly in the African setting, when you fall pregnant very early, you know, there's a stigma that maybe you're promiscuous and so you're excluded from the community.
And also even your family
even
in
from
severe
your family
cases.
as well. So it's kind of a double jeopardy for the young girl. You know, you're discriminated at school as well. The teachers and the girls and other learners as well, you know, start mocking you. Instead of calling you a student, they start calling you a mother. You know, they give you all these labels and titles that can discriminate against you. So it becomes very, very difficult for the young girl to survive in an environment like that.
The young girl, and of course the expected baby as well, and everything associated with that, access to healthcare, the cost of raising a child, all that. This exclusion policy is obviously central to a lot of this. It's an umbrella term for what's happening in the different countries. Barbara, what is World Vision hoping to achieve out of this? These are all sovereign states, they're sovereign countries. They make their rules and laws, how draconian or not, but how do we begin to try and shine the spotlight on this and possibly bring around some change and get rid of this exclusion policy?
Yeah, I think quite a lot of advocacy has to happen. And within World Vision, we've got what we call the Citizen Voice and Action, which is basically a community-based action where communities demand what is rightful theirs and communicate and work with governments to ensure that these policies are put in place. For example, in Zambia now they've got the re-entry policy. In Tanzania, they're trying, but not to the extent that we expect. In some of the West African, even in Sierra Leone, after ECOWAS Court of Justice ruled that this is discriminatory, they've gone back to, re-entry policy. So there are some, countries that are trying to put together those policies. But within World Vision as well, we're trying to work with churches because we're faith-based. So really having the churches lend that voice to say this is not fair for the young girl to be out of school because the cost is huge. I think you saw in the report, Sub-Saharan Africa could cost $10 billion in loss, in addition to the other effects of the pandemic, if they don't get the girls back into school. So
we've mentioned quite extensively West Africa, Central Africa, and a little bit more north. Give me a sense of the SADC regions. What are we looking like?
So with SADC region, the situation is not that dire. If you look at Zambia, like I mentioned earlier, they have a re-entry policy. South Africa, they have some, not necessarily re-entry policy, but strategies where they support the children to come back to school, do night school, and other forms of learning that they've put into place. Zimbabwe as well, they've got some night school type so that they remove that discrimination of the girls being in school while pregnant. So within Southern Africa, if you compare to West Africa, South and East Asia, I think we're doing fairly better.
Just a final question, very briefly. Where, if somebody watching this now, Barbara, wants to get hold of you, they can assist in some way, they just want more information, very briefly, where can people find you?
So they can find us on www.worldvisioninternational.org.
worldvisioninternational.org.
Yes, WVI.org.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for coming in. 1 million pregnant African girls could be blocked from returning to school. It's devastating for the African continent.